Hey y'all, welcome back to Twin Oaks Family Farm, Southeast Ohio, USA. We are in the meat bird production pen. These birds are growing. They've got just a little bit of time left before processing appointment. These are birds in production for making meat. There are currently 412 birds in this flock. They were hatched April 30th, 2025. We like a 6-week production schedule, so we aim for 42 days, as close as possible to 42 days without going over from start to finish. So we actually set our processing dates first, count back 6 weeks, and then request our hatch dates based on that. So the processing date for this flock was set at June 11th, 2025. We reserved that processing appointment for 400 birds. We ordered 425 birds because there generally is some flock loss. So we build in a little bit of quantity tolerance for that by ordering more birds than we intend to take to the processor for butchering and for processing. So we did get a few extra chicks in our shipment. So we were a little over 425 to start with. I think maybe 433 possibly. We are down to about 412, and of those 412, there's definitely a handful of birds that looks like additional imminent flock loss. So we're hoping to be right at 400 on processing day, which June 11th. As we're recording this, it's June 2nd, 2025. So we just have really a week and a day from now to when we are taking the birds to processing, and they look really good. And that amount of flock loss is unfortunate, but at this scale, that's pretty typical. So if you have any questions about that, just go ahead and put it in comments. I'll address what I can, certainly. So I have been in the barn several times already today. Right now I have some chores to do that I'm going to take care of, and then we're going to take a closer look in the pen at the birds and talk a little bit about our 6-week production schedule and our feed protocol. So thanks for joining us, y'all. We appreciate ya. One thing we've got to do is fill all the waters in the pen. We're adding bedding to the floor space today. We're going to check feeders, see what quantity's in them, see if we need to redistribute them a little bit. Feed will be added later in the day. Be checking air quality and temperature conditions. This flock at this age wants temperatures to be about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, so we're trying to keep conditions in the pen as close to that as possible. And we'll do a little bit of an exercise session. We'll encourage the birds to get up, walk around, and at the same time be observing their condition for wellness and for mobility. This is one of my favorite features of our meat bird barn. So the doorway behind me is our north face, and this is the first time that I have gotten that opened up with this flock. So from the doorway on the north face that we were just looking at, I just turned a 180, and now you're looking at the doorway on the south face. These doorways line up exactly, and it helps create such a wonderful natural breeze in this barn that it feels so good. So I actually didn't look at the temperature before we started recording. I'm going to get down here on the birds level, and I tried to zoom out to get a wider angle, but apparently we're at the limit. I can't do it. So waters all filled, topped off. So I'd already filled them once today, and I do expect the birds to empty them again. So they'll probably be filled again tonight. Feeders, we are letting the birds empty them. There's still some feed left in the feeders. So we have 12 50-pound bags of feed left for the birds, and we are on June 2nd. We feed until June 10th. I'm trying to recall. I think we started with 4,250 pounds of feed, so we're down to the last 12 bags. Okay, so that would be about 600 pounds of feed, I think, we have left to feed out. And we'd be feeding on the evening of the 2nd. The 9th will probably be the last time we would actually put feed in. So that's about 8 days that the feed we have left, we would try to make it last. Now, we're not going to make the birds go without food for an extended period of time during production. So if we feed all of their 22% protein that we purchase for the flock to eat during production, we will go and get something to say over here? We'll go and get just cracked corn. Oh, there's a dog behind me. That's what they're reacting to. So if they do eat all of the 22% protein feed that we allotted for them, we will go back to the feed mill and we will just get plain cracked corn, and that's what we will feed them until feed withdrawal. They definitely prefer their 22% protein feed. It is more palatable to them, and they will turn their beaks up at plain cracked corn. But if they want to eat and that's what's in the feeders, then they'll choose to take it or leave it. So we're going to definitely feed all of the 22% that we purchased for the flock. So all of the birds that are picking through the bedding and fluffing it up onto their feathers, that is not because of any difficulty with trying to stand up. That is because they are dust bathing. So they dust bathe with a little different movement from the egg production chickens that we're used to, but that's their dust bathing. So they do love to dust bathe, and as much as Cornish rock cross meat chickens, they do like to eat. They love their food. They like to eat it. But I think their second favorite thing has got to be getting fresh bedding, because they do play in it. There's one dust bathing. So when we add bedding, we see quite a bit of dust bathing. And then after the dust bathing, we see some preening. So I said we'd talk a little bit about our 6-week production schedule, and we talk a little bit about our feed protocol. So basically, feed protocol really is full feed, free choice, 24/7. So when the birds move in, when they're little tiny hatchlings, we are not using these big feeders and big waters at the time. We're using the little feeder chick trays with the hinge lids that have holes in them, and we're using the 1-gallon waters for them at hatch. So when they move in, there's no feed on the barn floor, just water. And we let them settle in for about 2 hours, and then we put down feed. And the goal there is to put down enough feeders and fill them all, that there's enough space at the feeders for all of our birds to go eat at the same time, if they would all choose to want to eat simultaneously. And then we keep those little feeders in the pen about the first 10 days, maybe up to day 14. Kind of depends on the flock, kind of depends on the quantity of birds. We're ready to get out of the baby feeder trays because we're filling them all the time, and we want to get them into the bigger feeders. So about 10 to 14 days, we'll swap in the 40-pound capacity feeders and take out the baby tray feeders. And then these feeders stay in the pen the rest of production until feed withdrawal. There is a reason for that. When we first started specializing in Cornish rock cross meat chickens, and that was about 5 years ago, this is 2025. When we first started specializing in Cornish rock cross meat chickens, we did a lot of online research. How do we do this? And we were initially just raising birds to have chicken meat for our household. The first chicken meat that we produced from the Cornish rock cross meat chickens, we were amazed and blown away, because before that we really had zero preference for chicken. We already raised our own beef, our own pork, and any chicken that we had had previously from a store, from a restaurant. We really were not impressed. So chicken was not our go-to, and the reason we tried raising them for ourselves is my husband said, well, maybe if it was chicken that we produced, maybe we would like it. Maybe it would have a different texture, different taste. So we were willing to try it. So when we got that first poultry, we were like, this stuff is so good. Other people need to experience great poultry. Other people need the opportunity to have this kind of poultry. Oh, you saw my face change because I was looking at a bird that was dust bathing and looked like it was going to lose its balance and end up over on its back. So it was a near rescue. While I was filling waters and then adding bedding, I already had one that did get over on its back. We had to do a little rescue for. So tragedy averted. Let me pick back up where I was. So we wanted to then raise poultry to market to other people in our area so that they could experience the taste of homegrown poultry. So that's when we started researching, okay, well, if we scale up, like we had done maybe 50 at a time. So if we scale up to 100 plus at a time, how's that going to work? So we spent a year practicing. How do we do this? And we observed them and wanted to get really good at how do we do this. Everything online says to feed them 12 on, 12 off, meaning put the feed in for 12 hours, put your feeders in for 12 hours, like during the daytime hours, and then at night, take the feed away. So there's a lot to that. On a pastured system, 12 on, 12 off is more likely a compatible fit, but I still wouldn't take feeders away during the feed restriction time. And basically all the online research, that's what it implies. It implies put the feeders in for 12 hours, take the feeders out for 12 hours. So we are kind of known for like questioning the norm and going, why do you do it that way? You know, if we see something that is going to work better. So what we found with actually raising birds was that when you take the feeders away and they don't want to be done eating, the next time you go to give the feeders back, the first feeder you take in and set down, they're all going to flock to it. So all that we've accomplished in that instance is basically just creating a feeding frenzy. So that does a lot of bad things for our birds. First of all, it sets up impossible competition for them all to get to one feeder at one time. Secondly, it puts them in a predicament where they're climbing on each other, piling on each other, shoving each other. All you're doing as a producer is setting up injury when those kinds of things happen. The other thing that it created then was a little bit of angst in the producer to get those feeders set in. So anytime you are in a livestock pen and your cortisol shoots up and your nerves start to ramp up, they sense that. So all kinds of bad things are happening for your birds when you create any kind of situation that's going to turn into a feeding frenzy. And we consistently felt like pulling the feeders was just a slow train to setting up a feeding frenzy when we went to put the feeders back in. So let me tell you the last time we took feeders away. I don't remember the date, but I remember the incident. If you've been with the channel a while, you've heard this story before. But at one point, we were using a different, so we have a different kind of feeder than we have in here. So these metal feeders are flat bottomed, but we had plastic feeders that were more along the lines of these plastic waters. And in the plastic feeders, the bottom underneath it is like an inverted cone. So there's kind of a hollow space under it. That's not the case with these. But we put the feeders back in at one point, set them all in. So feed on for 12 hours. When we went in the pen to take feeders away to do the 12 off, I picked up one of those plastic feeders and there was a chick. So these were still, they were maybe 2 weeks old. There was a chick under that feeder. So immediately I connected those dots. That chick had been there all day since I had set that feeder down. And I pulled that feeder up and I saw that chick, and my husband and I were working together, and I said, that's it. I said, no more. I said, I moved that chick, I put the feeder down, I said, leave them. I said, we are never moving feeders again. We're never pulling feeders again until feed withdrawal. That was the last time that we did 12 on, 12 off. And we switched our birds to full feed, free choice 24/7, and never looked back, don't regret it a bit, wouldn't change it for a thing. So that's how we feed them. Now, if you want to do a feed restriction and your birds are indoors, let me give you a tip on that. Use overhead lighting to influence when your birds go to eat. So when it gets nightfall, if you want to restrict the bird's feed intake, and it gets nightfall, it's dark outside, turn your lights off in your building. If you are using a building and you have electricity in it and you're relying on overhead lighting, turn your lights off. Because when it's dark, your birds don't have the photoreceptors in their eyes to see well at night, just like all the other chickens are the same way. So if you put the lights out, they're not going to feed, and you don't ever have to move the feeders. so that's what we learned about impacting feed access and feed restriction with meat birds. So if you've got more questions about that, put it in the comments. There's a whole lot more we could say about it, and that last tip and explanation is why I said if you are doing a pastured situation, I'm watching birds. I know I'm not looking at the camera looking at y'all, but I'm watching birds here. I had started out with saying if you do the pastured situation, the 12 on 12 off lends itself probably more compatibility to that system, because you naturally are going to have nightfall. So nightfall is going to impact feed restriction. But even in that case, I wouldn't pull feeders. I would never take the feeders out. I'd try to make it so that those feeders stay right in there, and you can let the birds eat them empty, and then you can take the feed in and add the feed. Now you're still going to sometimes create a feeding frenzy. So for example, if these birds eat down all the food in all these feeders and we let them go totally empty, and they maybe go a few hours without food, when we bring a bag of food in here and say we dump it in this one first, the ones that are wise to it are going to go right to that feeder. But simply not taking the feeders out gives you a little wiggle room. A lot of the birds will imprint in a specific portion of their pen or at a specific feeder. So it's going to give you a little more wiggle room for when you get the feed to their feeder. But that's our experience with it. But everything online, I know if you're doing online research, everything online, every video you find, they're all going to tell you, oh, the way you got to feed meat birds is 12 on, 12 off. I'm here to tell you at Twin Oaks Family Farm, we don't like 12 on, 12 off. We won't do 12 on, 12 off. And what we've been doing works for us. I think it also helps us accomplish the 6-week production cycle. So we stick with as close as we can get to 42 days production cycle without going over. And I explained earlier, we set our processing date first because we've had practice and we know that 6 weeks is reliable and we can consistently have birds ready for production in 6 weeks. We trust that process, we trust that number. So we set the processing date first, we count back 6 weeks. That's the hatch date we want. That's what we ask for. And the hatchery tries to work with us and tells us, how close can they get, and we go from there. And so sometimes we might be 2 or 3 days over. That's okay. We can work with that. So anyway, 6 weeks. Yeah, we're good with 6 weeks. Very good with 6 weeks. If I could produce them in 5 consistently, I would do that. But you got to have perfect ambient conditions to improve on a 6-week production schedule. And we never get perfect ambient conditions. So one of the things I've been watching, we're going to have to probably pull this water apart later and see what's going on. The water is all the way up to the rim of the tray, and surface tension is holding it there, but as the birds drink from it and break the surface tension, I think some of that water is probably flowing over the lip of that tray, it shouldn't be clear up there. You can see in that one the water is down a little bit. And so I had these trays perfectly clean. And that is one thing about when you add pine shavings or your bedding material for your birds. When it's loose and fluffy, they're going to kick some of it into their water trays. So for now, we're just going to let that ride. We will be checking on the birds again multiple times throughout the day. When they drink the water down out of these waters, we will clean those trays out again for them and be all good to go. So I did tell you they're 34 days old. I did tell you we have 412. I did tell you I think about 400 is still realistic where we're going to end up at. We've got 412 in the flock, but what you're looking at here on this floor space is about 402 because I've pulled about 10 that I feel strongly are probably imminent flock loss because of failure to thrive. So they're in a separate area where they don't have as many birds to compete with to get to feeders and waters. They have their own feeders and waters, their own space with other birds that are more their size. And it's just a better situation for those birds. They're not strong enough that that's going to buy them any longer lifetime. If they aren't flock loss from natural outcome of failure to thrive, they would end up being cull birds. So you can ask me about that if you need to know what that means. So, okay, temperature wise, also want to mention before we end this video, I wanted to mention that temperature wise, I did not look at the temperature right before I started recording, but we are in the 70s. I have a feeling we're climbing into the mid 70s. Opening up this north face of the building directly across from the open south face is a big help, but I am starting to see, you know, the birds, we're at the uppermost of warm for them. So we must be, ambient temperature down, especially where they are, must be about 75. They're comfortable right now, but we don't need it to be any warmer. But as we go on this week, I think we are supposed to have temperatures in the 80s, so we will be adding fans. But if you're raising meat birds, and especially if you want to go for a shorter production length, and especially if you want to utilize free choice feed around the clock, and I think even if you are using some other kind of production system protocols, ambient temperature is of utmost importance for Cornish rock cross meat chickens. They need the temperatures to be what they want the temperatures to be. It helps them thrive and it helps them get through production successfully. So that's a pretty easy set of references to follow. Day 1, 95 degrees. Day 7, 90 degrees. Day 14, 85 degrees. Day 21, 80 degrees. Day 28, 75 degrees. Day 35, 70 degrees. Day 42, about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And day 42 is when we're loading them for transport to take to the processor, or if you are going to butcher your own flock, the day that ideally we would be doing processing. So those temperature reference points are what we want to aim for the conditions around our birds throughout production. So we actually don't measure it with a thermometer. We look at the birds, okay? And when we see a pen of birds like this, where they're spread pretty evenly throughout the pen, where they look content, where they're getting up at free will to go to food and to go to water, where we see them consuming the feed at a steady rate, and we see them consuming water at a steady rate, and the failure to thrive birds are minimum quantity, then we know that ambient conditions are matching up pretty well with the bird's preferences. So overall, we're in good shape on this flock, and they are going to grow bunches here in the next, what do we have, 9 days? So they're going to grow a lot in the next 9 days. They're definitely going to be ready to go to the processor. So I just hope we stay at 400. So being able to have the doors open is a huge help. We definitely will be doing that throughout the daytime for this flock. and we are going to add more fans. I think I have 5 more fans on standby ready to add for them. And I think we're going to be able to add a row of feeders and waters over there in the vicinity of where those heat lamps are hanging. We are not going to be using heat lamps anymore. We are done with those. So thanks y'all for your support. Day 34 for this flock of meat birds, and we've been keeping up with them day by day. Thanks for watching, and thanks for just hanging out with us and seeing how chicken is really made. We do want to encourage people, know what you're eating. If you can, connect with the people that produce it and where you source it from. That's the best. But real chicken only comes from real chickens. So we want to make sure that people know that that's on everybody's radar. Real chicken only comes from real chickens. So thanks y'all. Thanks again. We appreciate you. God bless you.